everyone. Hello, Zurich. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me. The organization has been amazing. And I'm Manuel Pais. I'm one of the authors of the book Team Topologies with Matthew Skelton. So the book is about organizing business and technology for fast flow. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the ideas in the book. So I have to confess, I don't feel like I'm cloud native. I feel more like I'm floppy disk native. So that's how old I am, how long I've been around in the industry. And this is what AI thought an image for floppy disk native would look like. I think it's not too bad. And kind of the point of today's talk is that even if we have all this amazing tooling today and technology, some of the problems that we have in organizations and between teams are really not so much about technology. The technology is there to enable us, to help us, and we've come a long way, but there are a lot of problems that are still around. So hopefully this talk will help you identify and maybe connect to some of the issues I'm going to talk about. So we should talk first about what is a platform, if we're talking about unlocking platforms and unlocking platform engineering for organizational success. So I'm a fan of this definition from Evan Bottcher. He was saying the digital platform is the foundation of self-service APIs, tools, services, but also knowledge and support arranged as a compelling internal product. So let me ask you something. With this definition in mind, would you say that AWS is a platform? Can I have a raise of hands who thinks AWS is a platform? A few people, okay. So I like to ask this question because it triggers some thinking about what really is a platform for us in our organization, right? So basically, what we said in Team Topology is that we expanded this definition that is not just a compelling internal product, but it should reduce the cognitive load of its customers. And so I would need a whole other talk to go into the details of cognitive load, but essentially it should make life simpler and easier for our internal teams, the people using the platform, right? So that's my attempt of creating a person that is merging me, Matthew, and Evan. That's what AI came up with. So if we think about this definition, if we expand the definition, we say actually it needs to have a purpose, which is to reduce cognitive load of its customers, right? If we ask the question again, is AWS a platform? Well, yes, we have self-service APIs, tools, there's proper documentation, there's support, it's a compelling product. But on the other hand, if you think about let's say a traditional company that they're still running in data centers, and if you're asking teams to, okay, now you need to switch and use this cloud provider, if you ask the product teams to do that, you're actually going to increase their cognitive load if this is something new to them. It's easier, more comfortable if I can just push my code and my changes for someone else to install and run it in the data center, for example, right? On the other hand, we are making a trade-off because we understand why AWS or any of the cloud providers, the kind of scalability, elasticity it provides us, and how it helps the business and our systems and our applications. So we can then go back and think, okay, we have this business need to use this cloud provider, and we know this is going to increase cognitive load on teams. Now, what should be our internal platform? How can we make this simpler and easier for our teams, right? And there are different things we can do. We can help them upskill, learn, pair with them to kind of figure out how do we do this sort of migration. But also, what is like the simplest platform that can help them? And that might even be, especially for smaller companies, we don't necessarily need to build, and probably we shouldn't build some internal platform on top of AWS. We just need to make it simpler. Even some documentation that helps teams understand, well, this is a good way to configure your application. Here are some useful services to get started with AWS. Here's how you configure it for security, this kind of things, right? So that would be, for me, then that's an actual platform that is not only compelling, obviously it's based on this cloud provider, but it's helping reduce cognitive load for the teams that are having to use it. So one of the common problems I've seen since a long time ago is that when we're mandating platforms on teams to use, we are typically, I haven't seen an exception where we're not increasing cognitive load on teams. So we're slowing them down instead of helping. And a big part of that is that if we are in the platform, if we're working in the platform, we don't have the incentive to make this easier to use, to simplify the work of the product teams that are using the platform, right? And we might have all the best intentions, but we are driven by the incentives that are given to us. So if the platform must be used, we're going to tend to focus more on technology, the thing we're building, and not so much on the users. So this problem has been around, I think, forever, and it's not really about technology. Technology might make it easier to do stuff and get things done, but if we're not necessarily helping the teams using the platform. So we need the platforms to be driven by the business needs and especially the user needs, where the user are our internal teams in the organization, rather than focusing first on the technology. And I know I'm speaking to a lot of technologists here today, so hopefully this makes sense. And you've probably been on the other side where you were having to use technology that was not a good fit for what you needed to do. So I'd like to share some examples. I think there's a really cool example from Spotify. They've done really interesting stuff with their internal platforms. There's one that struck me, which has to do with their internal CI/CD system that they built called Tingle. And what's interesting is how they provide this system to the product teams. So they have templates that for most teams work out of the box. They can use the template to set up a pipeline for a new application or service, and that works quite well. But then they realize some teams need to customize their pipelines, so we need to offer that option as well, right, for some teams. And they even went further and realized, actually, some teams have automated so much of their workflows that they don't need the UI. They need to have a way to just use the APIs directly for CI/CD. So what's interesting about this is that essentially the teams at Spotify are looking at their kind of audience, all the potential teams that could use this system, and they're looking at their specific needs. And they identify that, well, we need to have these 3 different entry points or interfaces, if you like, to the CI/CD system. So I think that's a really good example of actually figuring out what are the user needs and how the platform is going to help them. And obviously, depending on scale, if you're a small company, you're probably not going to do this, but at certain scale, you might offer multiple options for what is the same service based on the user needs. Platforms need to be designed to scale. And yes, this is partially about scaling workloads and kind of the more technical side, but it's also about the actual platform teams and the platform group. How are they designed to scale over time? A cool example from Adidas. So Adidas invested a lot on their internal platform engineering group. And their kind of logical platform, I'm wondering if, it doesn't look too bad on the big screen. I think you can read it. So this is kind of their logical digital platform. And you can see there are multiple services. There are kind of internal platforms within this larger logical platform. And so it just shows that they did this work of actually understanding what are the services we provide, what are the different kind of streams of value to our internal customers. So this is part of the work that we need to do if we want to evolve the platform in a way that it doesn't become this huge, bucket of things that does a lot of things, but no one really knows what exactly are we offering, and there's a lot of misalignment inside the platform. So you could have logical platform where inside, from a team perspective, you might have, these are the different types of teams in team topologies that, I'm happy to talk afterwards if you want to more details, but essentially, we can expect to see inside the platform the same kind of organization and types of teams as outside the platform, right? If we have some kind of complicated subsystem for some reason to do certain part of the platform service, that's okay to have if we need a dedicated team for that. Mostly we should be aligning to what we call the streams, the value streams that the platform provides to their users, right? We might have, as you can see at the bottom, we might have internal platforms, right? So a typical example, you might have your cloud infrastructure platform, which is kind of the lower layer. And then you have, for example, a data platform that consumes the cloud infrastructure platform, right? So this sort of almost Russian doll kind of fractal approach to how we organize. But I wanted to focus especially on the stream-aligned teams, right? So in team topology, stream-aligned team, you could see it as a kind of cross-functional product team that has end-to-end ownership. So we actually understand our users, we understand what we need to do to improve their lives, their workflows, make life easier for them, and we're able to then make the changes all the way to production, to maintaining, supporting those changes, right? So if we have this kind of team, then we have the fastest feedback loop because we don't really depend on other teams. And I'm not saying that you must have only this kind of teams, but it's sort of an ideal, right? If we know that we have teams with more end-to-end ownership, then we're going to have a faster flow of changes and value to our customers. So why not think about this pattern inside the platform as well? Effectively, when we talk about platform team, it's sort of an alias. Effectively, we're saying there's a stream-aligned team working inside the platform grouping. So it means we understand there's a group of services that are coherent, that make sense together as a platform, and then we have teams aligned to those services that we've identified. And sometimes it's fairly easy to identify the services, right? We have our maybe CI/CD services, we have our infrastructure provisioning services. Other times, it's not so easy. So the point is to organize around these streams and services and have them owned by dedicated teams inside the platform. Not this huge or big teams that are having more and more responsibilities inside the platform, and then it becomes very hard for them to provide a good service, to innovate, and to evolve the platform. Because there's this fuzziness of, what do we really do? What is the value to our customers? And those sort of challenges. We can use some simple techniques that actually work for product teams as well as platform. So there's something we developed called independent service heuristics that might be helpful, or you might use something like even domain-driven design inside the platform. But this is a technique that tries to provide a simple way to think about if we have a candidate service in the platform, how would we validate that this actually makes sense? Would this, potentially, not that we're going to do it, but potentially could be run as a SaaS cloud type of service? So there are a number of questions in that technique that you can find on GitHub as well. And it's just for us to go through this, what are the candidate services? How well do they fit this idea of this can be an independent service that has its own customers, that we understand type of needs they have, and there's value in providing this service. Not financial value usually from a platform point of view, but there's value to the organization. And then we need to think about how our team's going to interact, especially when we're growing the platform, right? Going back to the Adidas example, the other thing here in this setup is that not only are these services and there are teams aligned to these services that they provide, but actually the other thing that they are showing here is that the teams responsible for the services are expected to alternate between different types of interactions. So I'm going to explain a bit more in detail what are the interactions, but the idea that it's not just about build, and operate the platform, and that's all we need to do, right? There's this alternating between understanding user needs, collaborating with the product teams or streamline teams, building, running the platform, and also facilitating, helping teams learn about why does this service even exist? What is observability, or what is a good way to do monitoring in this kind of environment? Adidas actually has a really interesting approach where they intentionally expect the platform teams to spend more or less half of their time not building, not running the platform, but actually facilitating, enabling the other teams to learn about the platform, the domains of where the platform helps, and helping on board and all these things. So we should expect platform teams to intentionally adopt and alternate these interaction modes. So the kind of general pattern that we expect to see is that we need to collaborate more in the beginning, in the discovery part, where we're trying to understand whether it's a new service or we are adding some new features to an existing service. We need to understand what do people actually need and how should we provide those features. Like in the Spotify example, well, we have some teams that actually would need direct access to the API. So let's make that work. So we then collaborate more in the beginning, and over time, as we build out this service or features, then we make them available to more and more teams. And so we get to what you see on the right side, with this kind of X as a service interaction mode, which obviously inspired by infrastructure as a service and this kind of approach where you have a self-service way to consume what the platform is offering you. Turns out, even for me, after the book came out, I started seeing how, and I had one example of a customer where we're doing a workshop about this new platform they were building around observability and monitoring and these kind of things. And we were talking as to where to start. And what we came to the conclusion, actually, most of their product teams have not been exposed to this sort of domains, to these sort of approaches. So what they needed was to be enabled, to be helped, and to learn about, why do we need to do these things? What's a good way to set up our monitoring, alerting, and all these things, right? Before we even start to build the platform. The problem there is that they already had funding coupled with the deadlines to deliver. By this date, you need to deliver this service. By that date, that service. So I think this is a missing part in that picture of the interactions, is that we need to actually, and we should start by facilitating first, which also kind of plants the seed when you're actually interacting and facilitating product teams. It will be much easier for them to later adopt this platform that you build or the services that you build, right? Because I already know the platform teams, I already have trust in them. They've helped me understand and improve a little bit the way we work. Again, people challenge, not technology challenge. We also need strong product management in platforms. Platform work is hard. You should have your own roadmap, your own direction, where we're trying to go. But at the same time, you need to be flexible because there are user needs and there are changes to what the product teams are doing that you might need to incorporate in the platform because you're there to serve the organization at the end of the day. And on the other hand, you don't want to be sort of a pushover either, right? That we're just going to do whatever people tell us. And so product managers, turns out, are really good at doing this kind of work. So that is my recommendation to my customers, is to really put your most experienced product managers in the platform. People who have done this, who have gone through the hard work of really being consistent about prioritizing, being able to create a good roadmap that aligns to the business strategy as well. This is really important. And interestingly, SAP, you might know, large software vendor, they've really invested in this product management approach for their internal platform. So it's actually one of their companies is a platform company for the rest of the group. And so what's interesting, so Dirk Lemmen is the head of that platform engineering group, and he was explaining that one of the big pains they identified across SAP is that when you want to integrate a new open source library, for example, in the product, it's really complicated because they run in over 180 countries. Most of the time, it's still on-prem in data centers. And so there's a lot of regulations and legislation that they need to follow to get even like a simple open source library to show that it's compliant, that we can include it in the product. So this was a big pain for product teams. They would have to go through multiple sort of compliance and security teams, use different tools to actually get this final label at the end. Yes, this is compliant. And so they focused on this problem. Hey, here's a really big problem that causes a lot of delays when we're trying to innovate and use open source. So they took this, their approach to the platform is based on this idea of the paved roads, make things simpler and easy for product teams. So one of the things was, let's bring together people from all these teams that are responsible for security, compliance, all the different tooling around these areas, bring them together and create this sort of paved road to make it much simpler to get open source into the product. And that worked quite well. And they also didn't try to make this like the perfect solution that works for all the teams. They identified specific domains and technology where we want to make this paved path easy. So they brought everyone from development to delivery under this same organization, the platform organization, to reduce the friction that was and the cognitive load that you can imagine on the product teams. Well, we have to talk to this security team today, and then in 2 weeks we need to talk to this compliance team. And we are having to orchestrate all this work that is not really directly providing value to the product and the customers, right? And we have a product management team, or they have a product management team, because they see the platform as a product in itself. And being able to, like I said, having a clear roadmap that people also understand how this helps and connects to the business, but also is flexible enough to fix and help the actual problems that teams have. So for them, the goal of the platform is to relieve development teams from cognitive load due to common painful tasks. Another thing we need to think about is to demonstrate business value of the platform as early as possible. Going back to the Adidas example, this is from one of their presentations from their VP of the platform engineering group. And if you look at this and they're talking about what is the value of their platform, it's not super kind of technical delivery-oriented metrics. It's about, we save time for teams to invest in the actual features of their products. We reduced costs on a yearly basis by having, better ways to do things in the platform. So it's really speaking this business language, which I know when I've been there is kind of foreign to a lot of us coming from technology side, but we really need to make this effort because in the long run, the platform is only going to be sustainable if we can show this value on a regular basis. So it's not a bad idea to take this perspective. Imagine you are the CFO, someone who is not technical, and what would they find valuable in your platform? Right? How would they perceive value in your platform? So if you talk to them about, well, we serve this much traffic through our platform services, so traffic to the product, I don't really know as a CFO what that means. Sounds okay, good, but could we do that? Just use AWS directly, perhaps, so we don't have to invest in internal platforms, right? That might be how I see it as a CFO. But if you talk to them about how much revenue is being served or through these platform services, that kind of changes the conversation. Then it's a lot more about, okay, if we do this or if we, change the approach or move to another kind of platform, what happens to this revenue? And finally, I would say platforms need to start small and grow over time based on the demand. So we're not growing just because there's new technology or because that's kind of the inertia that we always need to be growing the platform, but actually we're identifying demand and we're showing that we're helping address this demand. A very interesting example from ING Bank. So do you have ING here in Switzerland? I'm not sure. But they're big in the Benelux, right? Netherlands, Belgium, also Spain, where I live, and other countries. And it's a huge organization. But they took this approach that, from a platform perspective, one thing they're trying to do is to ensure discoverability through a central marketplace for platforms with consistent naming conventions. Obviously, at their scale, when we're talking about thousands and thousands of technology workers, then we need to ensure discoverability so that people even know that this kind of platforms exist and we can use them. But we should do this at any scale, right? If we want a platform to be used, well, first of all, it should be discoverable. We should have a way to probably spend some time into actually telling other people in the organization, showing them what the platform does, how it can be helpful, what kind of use cases it addresses, and this kind of thing, right? Especially the larger the organization, the more we're going to have to do this work. But even at a small scale, we should still look at ways to make it easier to discover what does the platform offer. And then what they do, which is I find quite different from most organizations, especially enterprise type of organizations, they're not pushing as a, straight away, let's centralize this thing, let's make this central platform that works for the whole organization. This kind of, I would say, fairly naive view of how do you actually build platforms that help the teams. So they actually look at platforms start more at the kind of tribe level. So they use Spotify model. So they within groups of around 150 people, that's where the platforms start. And then as they demonstrate that they're more broadly applicable in some cases, other cases not, it's more like a local platform, they then may evolve to a higher level and potentially becoming global, which means being used by thousands of people. And that means that they think about, okay, in these transitions from a local platform used by 150 people to being used by multiple hundreds to multiple thousands, we're going to have to think about how does this transition work in terms of scaling the actual technology, infrastructure, and so on, but also in terms of scaling the team so that we can provide the right level of service. So I'm getting to the end. I just wanted for you to think about this in your kind of cloud native journey. If you look at this kind of sort of contrast between kind of more traditional platforms and what we're calling digital platforms, if you look at this, really the technology doesn't impact many of these aspects. So we can have a very traditional platform with cloud native and the latest technology, right? It can still be being provided in a way that increases cognitive load. We're not really understanding how to make it simpler for our teams. We might be focusing on shared services over the user needs. We might be doing this in a more request-based approach or ticket-based approach, so not self-service. And we might be enforcing a lot of things rather than ideally allowing teams to decide based on demand. And we might be having large platform teams to be able to run our Kubernetes infrastructure or what have you, rather than actually understanding what are the streams that are valuable to the teams using the platform. So hopefully you can look at this and think about how your journey kind of sits in here and what are some ways we can move more towards the right side. And finally, this is something I created as sort of a thinking tool for people. You might adopt some kind of manifesto inside the organization, and this might be helpful across when you have multiple platforms in the same organization, just to have a way to describe why are we here, what are the sort of the values we're trying to adhere to, and what are we trying to provide to the rest of the organization, right? So obviously inspired by the Agile Manifesto and things like, do we kind of value team interactions more than the actual functionality, adoption over mandates, and so on, right? Just something that might be interesting to think about and discuss inside the organization with your platform teams and also the product teams. And you might be asking, you talked a lot about cognitive load. What about cognitive load on the platform teams themselves? Yes, that's a big problem. We do have this model for assessing cognitive load that works for any team. So have a look if you're interested. It's called Temperature. And finally, I know I'm getting to the end of my time. I will be around, so feel free to come up and chat and ask questions. At 12 p.m. when lunch starts, we'll do a book signing. There are a few copies at the Puzzle ITC booth. If anyone's interested, a few copies of the book. And we're also doing a raffle for a spot in this leadership masterclass I'm running tomorrow here in Zurich. So if you want to scan the code, you can get a chance to get a ticket. And with that, I want to thank you for your attention, and hopefully you got some food for thought in the next weeks. Thank you very much.